All right, hey everyone. My name is Scott Luptowski. I'm a web developer at Handy, and as John said, today I'll be speaking about the HTML5 Geolocation API. Let me kill this thing down here. And there's a few reasons it's been on my mind lately. One is that I've been using it a lot at work lately, so naturally I've been thinking a lot about it. Two is that I got lost on the way here because Times Square is just ridiculous. And then two other points about the API itself. The first is that it's like there's a lot of feature parity and maturity in the API itself, which I think lends well to like a 10-minute, 15-minute explanation at a meetup. So for instance, if you were to use this API, these are the browsers that you could target right out of the box. So as long as you're targeting IE 9 or above, you can use the API as is native or as is natively written. You don't have to worry about putting a wrapper around it or anything like that unless you wanted to go below IE 9, but I'm not sure why you would want to do that. The other reason is kind of weird, but I feel it's like futuristic. Like if you remember back in the 90s and early 2000s, you would go to a website and it would say like, hey, you're visiting from Atlanta, Georgia. And you're like, oh, cool, that's awesome. What am I going to do with that information? But the second you put a map on a screen, I think it kind of changes the relationship between the person who's on the page and the information that they're interacting with. So like it changes their expectations as well. So it goes from like a site to an app and something like a document viewer towards an experience. So I think just having a map on your page and having information that people can interact with contextually adds a lot to that experience. So how do we use geolocation in our apps? And how do we get from this, which is my computer asking me to allow this particular website to use my location, to this, which is a point on a map? It all starts with a function. So everything that you need to use for the geolocation API is inside window.navigator.geolocation. And the thing that you'll be interacting with most is a function called getCurrentPosition. And that takes anywhere from 1 to 3 arguments, only the first one is required. And that's a success callback. So in the event that a user says, yes, you can use my location, and the device gives you an accurate location, that function will be invoked with information about those coordinates. So you are here, and you have called the function. It's waiting for the response. The function returns immediately, or returns undefined, and then it's waiting asynchronously for you to say yes or no. But before we get there, let's talk about sources of location data. So as you can imagine, depending on if you're on a phone or on a computer or a tablet, the place that you're getting that data from is probably different. The gold standard would be GPS, which has a accuracy of plus or minus 10 meters to wherever your location is. Clearly a phone has something like that, whereas a computer most likely does not. And then there's Wi-Fi, which is, you're able to get pretty accurate readings from Wi-Fi as well. And then IP address. IP address would be the lowest of the three. I was reading some information about this online, and the example that people said was like, imagine you're a worker in like a big corporate office building, and everything goes through one router, and the IP address is like 2 miles away. You're not going to be able to get a good reading there. But most people will be looking at this on their phone, and assuming that you can get a good GPS reading, that would work. All right, so let's say you get a successful response. What does that look like, and what can you do with it? You get a timestamp, which is Unix time, and then you get this chords object. And as you can see, there are 3 things in there and a bunch of nulls. So the only 3 things that are actually required by the spec are the latitude and the longitude, which is pretty self-explanatory, and then the accuracy in meters. So plus or minus 41 meters, this is your location. The other things as well, altitude and altitude accuracy, heading, which is the direction of your travel, and then the speed. Those aren't required per the spec, so you can kind of think about it like this. And that particular reading that I just showed you was from Google Chrome. So Chrome on my desktop did not give me any of those values. Okay, so I have latitude and a longitude. What can I do with that? I can put it on a map. The Google Maps API is very comprehensive, to say the least. But putting a marker on a map is one of the easier things that you can do. So you have your latitude and you have your longitude. You have a map on that 5th line, I guess. And then you create a new position and a new marker, and you're good to go. But what if you wanted to store this somewhere else? So for instance, I've done this all on the front end. I'm in the success callback. I've gotten some information. I've put it on a map. But what if you wanted to store that in a database? The more observational, the people who observe this, I guess, you may have noticed that here I have about 12 to 15 decimal points on the end of latitude and longitude. and here I only have 5. Is that significant? Kind of, actually. So we were working on something at work where we were dealing with location. We were looking at the readings that we were getting back from the front end. They had 8 to 10 points of accuracy. And then we saved them in our database, we pulled them up on the screen, and there were only 5 points of accuracy. And they were off by like a few hundred meters. And we were wondering what the problem was. And so we're like, all right, we're just like losing good data here. Like, where's all this data going? It turns out it was something in our database. Like, what's happening to these numbers? Are they getting chopped off? And that was kind of the problem, but not really, actually. This is something that we found on Stack Overflow, showing, like, based on the number of decimal points you have, how accurate something is. So on this line right here, 4 decimal places means that you are accurate within 11.1 meters, and 5 decimal places would be accurate within 1 meter. So fairly accurate for like nearly any application that I can imagine. So it turns out that our bug was related to something else, but just something to be aware of. Like, if you are trying to store this information somewhere, you don't need to store 12 decimal points unless you're like dealing with some very infinitesimal amount of measurement. So make your own judgments. You may need to store more data than we do. We were fine with 4 decimal points after realizing we didn't need to migrate our database and backfill data and things like that. Okay, so what about error cases? I just showed you what happens if someone has successfully said, yes, I want you to see my location, and the device is able to give you the location. There's 3 reasons why it could fail. Number 1 is self-explanatory, permission denied. That just means the user has said, nope, I do not want you to see my location. And as good developers, we should create an experience that lets them use that product to the best possible way without having that location information. The next is timeout, and this is something that you can specify. You can say, I only want to wait 300 milliseconds to calculate a location, and if it doesn't come back, just give up and hit the error case. An important thing to know is that this timeout doesn't include time spent waiting for the user to click yes or no, so just something to be aware of. And then finally, position unavailable. This is like if something in the GPS chip like malfunctions, or something in the phone like prevents you from getting a reading, you would get position unavailable, and that's likely not going to happen too often. And this is what an error response looks like. So you can imagine that this code is 1, meaning that I was able to, or I denied permission to use the location. So you're able to say, all right, if someone canceled because of this versus because of that, give them a different experience. What else can I do with the geolocation API? There's only 2 other functions in the API, which is cool. It's pretty simple. Watch current position and clear watch. And if you're wondering where geo came from, I declared that 12 slides back, but JavaScript has global variable scope, so I'm able to call it. But that was a terrible joke. So watch current position is a callback which is called every time the function, or excuse me, the position changes. So if you want to track someone as they walk down the street, you call watch current position, and this function is called every time that someone moves down the street. And then clear watch is similar to clear interval or clear timeout. Watch current position returns an integer. You pass it to clear watch, and then you're no longer watching the position. And then finally, the third optional argument, if you see here, the success function, the failure, the options. The third one is some options. Enable high accuracy, which sounds like it should be on by default, but is not. A timeout, which is the number of time in milliseconds, and then the maximum age. So if you want to say, I want to take this cached location, but it can only be like 5 minutes old, that's something that you're able to do. I have this tiny demo here. Hopefully I get, oh, damn. Let's, I think I lost it when I killed the, no, Peaceful Wildwood. Oh, take it off again, thank you. No? All right, it's actually not too important, so I will, I'll just forget that for now. But what I whipped up was this Tiny Express app, and it's a map showing you New York City. And every time I went to that page, it asked me for my location, and I would click yes, and then I would see a pin appeared on the screen. And it's very simple. It didn't take too much work. It's just storing the places somewhere, and then every time you hit the page, populating the map. But what struck me when I was making this was that something as simple as like points on a map can turn into something really cool once you add like location. So I was thinking about it actually on the walk over here. Like, what if there was like a site where you can leave messages to people at locations? And that's a really basic CRUD app. But the second you add maps to it, it takes on this other dimension. And there's some really cool stuff that you can do with that. So that's about it. I'm sorry that my demo's not working, but thank you for listening.